China is intensifying its efforts to de-dollarize by offloading a record amount of US bonds. In the first quarter, China sold $53.3 billion worth of treasuries and agency bonds, marking the largest sell-off in history. Since peaking at $1.3 trillion in 2013, China has cut its holdings by about $500 billion, choosing to buy fewer treasuries than those reaching maturity. Why is this happening? Why is China selling off US debt? There are several reasons behind this move. In today's video, we'll discuss why the US dollar is rapidly losing its status as the world's reserve currency. But before we dive in, please subscribe to our channel for more engaging content like this. Now, let's explore why not just China, but the entire world is moving away from US dollars and turning to gold, a non-political currency. Why China is dumping US Treasury bonds? J. Paul Getty, an American oil billionaire once reputed to be the richest man in the world, famously said, "If you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. If you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem." When you examine China's holdings of US Treasury bonds, you'll be astonished by the extent of their investments in US debt. The US owes China nearly $800 billion, so it's not the US that should be worried, it's the Chinese. When the Russia-Ukraine conflict erupted in 2022, the United States and its allies imposed sanctions on Russia's central bank and finance ministry, freezing approximately $300 billion of Russian sovereign assets held in the West. Like other central banks, Russia's central bank had allocated part of its gold and foreign exchange reserves to liquid assets such as major currencies, gold, and government bonds. About half of these reserves were held in the West. The Russian central bank confirmed that around $300 billion of its assets have been frozen in the West. At the time, Russia's total foreign currency and gold reserves amounted to $612 billion. Most of these assets, including those of private Russian citizens, were frozen in Western depositories. If the West can confiscate and the US can weaponize its dollar, China is at risk. Given the current geopolitical tensions between China and the US and China's significant holdings of US bonds, the risk primarily falls on China. Recognizing the risks, particularly after witnessing the fate of Russian reserves held in US dollars, China has been cautiously reducing its US Treasury holdings. In 2011, China owned over $1.3 trillion in US debt. However, as tensions between China and the US have escalated, China has been selling off these bonds. In the first quarter of 2024 alone, China sold $53 billion worth of US bonds, exceeding the already substantial volumes it offloaded last year. Currently, China still holds about $775 billion in US government debt. This move indicates that China is accelerating its retreat, given the unlikely improvement in trade relations between Beijing and Washington. The Biden administration has imposed tariffs on a range of advanced Chinese products, targeting everything from electric vehicles to batteries. Even if former President Donald Trump regains the White House in November, he has vowed to impose tariffs as high as 60% on Chinese imports. Why the world are accelerating de-dollarization? Trading with local currencies has become common in the world economy. Local currency trade, or LCT, is now widespread, with many countries making agreements to trade using their own currencies. After the pandemic and the Ukraine crisis, many small and mid-sized nations have started using LCT. For example, Russia and Bangladesh recently agreed to make payments in Yuan to avoid issues from US sanctions on Russia. Before this, Bangladesh and India signed an agreement to trade in rupees. The 10 countries in Southeast Asia, known as ASEAN, are also pushing to de-dollarize by trading in local currencies. So far, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand have agreements to use their own currencies for transactions. Vietnam will be the 6th country in the region to join this effort. But why are so many countries moving away from the dollar? The US has been using its financial system to control its geopolitical rivals, especially in conflicts with China and Russia. This weaponization of the dollar is eroding international trust. The use of the dollar for geopolitical purposes is making the world uneasy. Think about it. If you start a company and do business globally, you need to be careful, especially if you're in a sensitive industry like semiconductors or AI. The US government might impose sanctions on you and your business. For example, the US has pressured South Korean companies to limit selling chips and equipment to China. Besides geopolitical and trust issues, de-dollarization is also driven by high exchange rates and decreasing foreign exchange reserves in developing nations. If you're doing international business, you will need US dollars for trade. This means you have to buy and exchange your local currency into US dollars for transactions, which can be costly and complicated. Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, has urged developing countries to replace the US dollar with their own currencies in international trade. He said, "Every night I ask myself why all countries have to base their trade on the dollar. Why can't we do trade based on our own currencies? Who decided that the dollar was the currency after the disappearance of the gold standard?" And it seems President Lula has a point. The rise of gold and Chinese yuan, often seen as a safe investment during times of geopolitical and economic turmoil, gold has soared in price due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the conflict in Gaza. However, gold's rise to record highs above $2,400 per ounce has been more resilient and lasted longer because of China. China's central bank has been steadily increasing its gold reserves while reducing its holdings of US debt. Adding to this trend, Chinese speculators believe gold's value will continue to rise. Record central bank buying led by China, India, and Turkey boosted gold demand in the first quarters of 2024. Notably, China's central bank continued its gold purchases for the 17th consecutive month in March 2024, setting a record for the longest streak of monthly purchases. China relies heavily on the US dollar for global trade. Beijing is worried about becoming too dependent on the dollar and wants to diversify its reserves. This goal aligns with other BRICS countries, whose economies are expected to dominate by 2050. The BRICS nations have even considered creating a shared currency that could challenge the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. The dollar's dominance allows the US to borrow money at lower costs and use the currency as a diplomatic tool, such as when imposing sanctions on Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Chinese leaders are concerned that China could face similar US restrictions if it decides to expand its military activities or if the trade war with Washington escalates. As you can see, the dominance of the US dollar is declining as more countries push for de-dollarization. This shift didn't happen overnight. It has been a gradual process over the past 20 years. The percentage of global reserves held in dollars has decreased from 73% in 2001 to 58% in 2023. Notably, 11% of this decline occurred since 2016, with 8% happening just in 2022. While the dollar's share in global reserves is shrinking, the yuan's share is growing and now ranks 5th globally with a 3% share. The yuan has even become Brazil's second-largest foreign currency in its reserves, which helped drive their local currency trade deal. China's share of the global forex reserve is increasing along with its international trade and investment. Many countries are starting to see the yuan as a reliable and trustworthy currency. As a result, they are choosing the yuan over the dollar, which helps them maintain a balanced foreign exchange reserve. Even though the dollar's share in global reserves is decreasing, it still holds the largest share at 58%, with no immediate competitor. Do you think the US dollar's dominance will continue to fall? Will other currencies like gold or maybe even cryptocurrency eventually replace the dollar? Share your thoughts and leave your comments below. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button to show your support. More importantly, subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos like this one.